Hi, welcome everybody. I'm Mark Fox, CEO of NetEvents, and delighted to welcome you to today's session on exploring the myths of zero trust. Chairing today's session, we have Rick Turner, who is the Principal Analyst at Omdia for Emerging Technologies. And I'd like to hand over to you, Rick, to introduce today's session.
Thanks very much indeed, Mark, and thanks for the invitation to chair this one. Looking forward to this. Thanks to everybody who's dialing in or listening in, particularly the members of the press. As a former journalist myself, I always enjoy interactions with your noble profession. So let's get right on into it. As you can see, we've got a goodly collection of companies, all of whom I'm familiar with, all of whom I've interacted with considerably over the years. And I'm looking forward to the perspectives that each of these folks can bring to this conversation. As you can see, you know, from everybody from F-Secure, GigaMon, HashiCorp, and NetFoundry and VMware. So some real industry luminaries, I think we've got here. Just want to ask each of the guys to give literally just a 30-second introduction to themselves, and then we'll get into a bit more detail. Jordan, do you want to start?
Sure, happy to. Hello, everybody. I'm Jordan LaRose. I'm the Director of Consulting and Incident Response for F-Secure North America, and I oversee our technical operations here. Marvelous, thank you. Ian, over to you, sir.
Hi, I'm Ian Farquhar. I'm Field CTO Global for GigaMon, and I also run the security architecture team at GigaMon.
Perfect. Chris, for you, please.
Yeah, thank you, and thanks all. My name is Chris Kent. I am Senior Director of Product Marketing for all of our security products here at HashiCorp.
Marvelous. Galeal?
Thanks, Rick. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Galeal Zino, founder and CEO of NetFoundry.
And Vivek? Oh.
Yes. Hi, everyone. This is Vivek Bhandari from VMware. I am the Senior Director of Product Marketing for our networking and security solutions. And I lead the organization that talks about all these amazing products that helps our customers leverage to just better secure their environment. So looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thanks, guys. And let me do a bit of a level set here. It's important to begin that to say that zero trust is not a technology. Here we are, a bunch of technologists talking about technology per se, but zero trust is not a technology. And I never tire of saying this. I'll use the term state of mind because it enabled me to use that rather lovely, colorful picture of somebody going and meditating. But in fact, what it really is yes, it's a state of mind. It's a philosophical stance to technology, if you will. It's a mindset. And as such, it involves much a cultural change in a company as it does any technology that you're going to use to enable it. You'll see that the kind of byword or the motto of zero trust is we move away from the previous paradigm, which was trust but verify, which was the old scenario of you logging on to something at the door, if you like, or at the gate. They would check who you were, verify you at the gate. Once you were in, you were in. That no longer holds. It is found to be faulty, found to be full of holes and extremely vulnerable. So the zero trust mentality is really summed up in never trust, but always verify. This is a concept which was floated, should we say, back in 2010 by a gentleman called John Kindervag, who at the time was a Forrester analyst. He went on to become CTO or one of the CTOs at Palo Alto. I believe he is now working at another startup somewhere. And I've also had folks from the Department of Defense, people who worked at the DoD even before 2010, telling me that no, in fact, zero trust, we were already bouncing the concept around even before John kind of popularized it. But he at least can take the credit for having made it a far more universal term throughout the industry, even if he didn't actually invent it. So next one, on the next slide, we'll see that what that really means, never trust and always verify, is in the first instance, and all the bits in red here are the bits that I think are the steps, if you like, for implementing or for at least for carrying out a zero trust, first thing you're going to do is you're not going to trust any employee, any partner, any partner's employee, or any contractor at any time. And of course, we all remember the contractor problem with Edward Snowden, who popularized the issue of contractor security. But it's across the board here. It's from your actual internal employees all the way through to the third parties that you let interact with your system, such as your contractors and your partners. There's no more trust for any of them. And the next step for us on the next slide is going to be authenticating that each of them. And what that means is we just authenticate their identity and the security posture of their device at the very least every time they request access to any individual asset within your infrastructure. I'm not saying let me into your infrastructure and I'll just wander around at will. No, I'm asking for access to a particular application, as you'll see in a minute. Let's go on to the following. Here we see that you're going to authorize access, therefore, to a specific asset, to a particular database, a particular application, whatever, data store. But it's only that particular asset, and only that asset and even then, only if they meet all the criteria. Now, I've already listed their identity, their device posture, whether or not they've got, I don't know, AV, antivirus on their phone, whether they've got the latest version of the operating system, all of those good things on their laptop. But there are more. You can also have criteria such as time of day. We don't want Rick dialing in at 2 o'clock in the morning because that's a bit dodgy. That's strange. Equally, we don't want Rick, who normally logs in from the UK, to suddenly dial in from China. So there'll be geographic limits here, and there could be others that you yourself can choose to set in order to frame the authentication and authorization of that individual. And on the next slide, you'll see that we then, what beyond that, and I almost include, I've described the zero trust mentality as never trust, always verify. I almost put a third phrase in there, which is continuously monitor, because after you have authenticated and authorized this character who's come onto your infrastructure at the door, at the gate, as it were, at the drawbridge of the old castle, at this point, in the traditional world, you just let them in and let them stay as long as they want and wander around. Not so here. You're authenticating them and authorizing them to access a particular asset. But in addition to that, you're going to continuously monitor what they do on that asset for a very good reason. Because, of course, after they get on that asset, some clever individual may hijack their account. And suddenly that session becomes hijacked and there's somebody else acting on there who appears to have been authenticated at the entry point. So you have to keep an eye on them effectively throughout the session. And if something changes, you start seeing some anomalous behavior going on in the session, you say, okay, this is not looking right. You can either block them altogether, kill the session, or if you have some level of confidence that it is still them, but you'd like to reaffirm your confidence. Maybe you haven't seen Rick logging in from China, but he does occasionally travel. So who knows, maybe he is in China. Let's just throw up an additional authentication requirement. I don't know, the mother's maiden name, or the name of their first pet, or the first street they lived on, the kind of thing. So that's the continuous monitoring dimension. We'll see that then, in addition to all of that, if I get on and I'm accessing that database and you've authenticated and authorized me to get there, okay, now I want to pivot and go to a second asset. Maybe it's another database or a different application or something. I'm not getting direct access to that without going back out and having to authenticate to get to that one, even though that first session may still be underway. So it's going to sound painful, right? Because I'm authenticating multiple times. But that is the spirit of zero trust. I'm sorry, but you know, if you're going to limit access, this is the way you go about it. Now you can, and we will go into this later, but you can, of course, create some workarounds here where maybe somebody who's a system administrator always accesses 3 standard assets to do his daily job. And in that case, maybe you can create a web interface whereby he can go there, authenticate, and you say, okay, we're going to let Joe in sysadmin always get to those 3 assets, but we're still blocking him to all the rest just because he's a sysadmin or a developer or anything else, or even a C-level exec, doesn't mean he's going to get to see the whole world of applications and assets that we've got. I know zero trust is, when you talk about trust nobody, it does start sounding like paranoia. And I assure you, as I'm sure you realize, that if you were to adopt zero trust in your social life, it would not win you a lot of friends. However, we're not talking about your social life. We are talking about your corporate existence and the need to defend your corporate assets, your data, your infrastructure, even your people. And it's going to meet resistance. There's going to be pushback. There will be people within your organization that say, God, this is a bit extreme, isn't it? Now, you can probably get away for the foot soldiers in the organization. You do a couple of, all hands Zoom calls where you have them all on from across the globe, and you G them all up and say, I'm really sorry, guys, but we've been breached, or one of our direct competitors was breached the other day. It was really high profile. It was horrible. The CEO lost his job, or someone, in other words, they're getting sued. We want to avoid that. You have to explain it to them. But you could probably get away with a couple of Zoom calls for the different geographies, different time zones, to actually with most of the foot soldiers. When it comes to the C-level execs who are used to having much greater access, let alone the sysadmins and the developers who need broad access to do their jobs, those guys are really going to push back. And I bring this up because I do think that if any organization is about to say, okay, we want to adopt zero trust, they're going to have to think it through. This is a cultural change. How do we sell this to our internal constituents, particularly those guys that would be in traditional world, we call them the privileged users within our organization, who are just used to getting access all areas, right? And suddenly they too are going to be constrained. So that's something to bear in mind when your enterprise is saying, okay, I want to get into zero trust. That pretty much sums up my thoughts. Now we get to the first topic of conversation. And I'm going to kick off with this first question. Straightforward, a pretty easy question, you might think, but it's not as straightforward as it sounds. And I apologize for embrace, which sounds a bit emotional rather than adopt. But I did want to use that term embrace simply because it brings home, it reiterates the point that zero trust ain't just a technology, folks. It is a culture. Therefore, it's more than just going and buying something and reading up the manuals and implementing it. It does require a change in mindset. And with that in mind, I'm going to throw this one. The first one's going to go to Jordan. Jordan, tell me, what is your company doing to help customers embrace zero trust?
Thanks, Rick. Yeah, so I'd like to actually start this one off by reflecting on an earlier point that you made. It's zero trust is a lot of things, but it's not a technology. I also think that the moniker isn't quite right, actually. I think a more appropriate thing to call it would be minimum trust. And the reason I say that is, when you're looking at implementation and all of these things that you were talking about, you're trying to give every device, vendor, user, anything that enters your network, the absolute lowest level of privilege that you can possibly give to them. So that's one way that we at F-Secure try to communicate this concept to our customers is, it's not like you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You don't have to, completely strip out everything in terms of privilege, but you really need to carefully consider how every single portion or piece of your environment is put together when you're implementing things. So that's something that we do. We call it, generally in consulting, we call it design reviews. So we do a lot of design reviews of products or protocols, different things that our users or our clients are implementing into their environments. So in this design review process, when a product is being put in, we will do a full scale analysis of, okay, what do we need in terms of privilege? What do we need in terms of user accounts? What do we need in terms of protocol support? All of these different, sort of technical background things. But what's important in part of that design review process is not just that, we're analyzing these things at a point in time, but we're documenting it for the future. So if a company is breached and, it comes in through, an apropos example would be SolarWinds. If we had done a design review of SolarWinds and we had looked through, okay, here's all of the tethers it has to the rest of our network, and we've already documented that, we already understand it, we have it in our back pocket. When that attack comes in, we can pull out that document, analyze it, and immediately know where all of our liabilities lie and which doors to close to stop that malicious actor from spreading into the rest of the network. So I think that's a really important piece of this zero trust process is doing those kinds of design reviews or analyses of products or other things that you're implementing into your network. And I'm interested to hear about if anybody else on the panel has experience doing design reviews or has some other suggestions for ways to kind of do that first step of mitigation.
Yeah, the proactive concept, Jordan, that you mentioned is critical, right? So in our case, there's really only two things, and I like the word embrace, Rick, right? If things aren't embraced, they only go so far. So what isn't embraced? Things that are not embraced are bolted on, right? They're added on, they're extra. So to Jordan's point on being proactive, the first thing we do to help our customers is enable them to be what's now being called shift left, which is build zero trust technology build it into the development and delivery lifecycle rather than bolt it on later. And we're enabling developers and DevOps and NetOps. We're enabling the builders to do that, which makes lives much easier for the end users down the line. And then the second thing is, I kind of call it journey plus destination. We want to give a North Star. We want to give them the ability to get their organization where they need to go, not just from a security perspective, but a business velocity, innovation, et cetera perspective. But they need to get there, right? We need to enable them to take an iterative approach to get there, where the different steps on the journey produce business benefits, tangible business benefits, really important to our customers. So Rick, when we're successful, we enable the customer to shift left, and we enable both the journey and the destination.
Excellent stuff. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think using the example you gave, Jordan, the thing that's really interesting about zero trust from kind of our lens here at HashiCorp is there's this kind of movement that's happening where a lot of companies are making this shift from kind of like the static world of like traditional like security, traditional ways of kind of running. They would own the data centers, they would own the networks, they would have these kind of things in place that really like the trust was kind of implied, unless there was maybe like a bad actor within the company, but like it was still, they owned and they could guard everything out until the point where, it's going out into the public, where like now where companies are moving into this kind of distributed world where there are multiple clouds, they're hybrid, they're across these different things. Using that example that you talked about, Jordan, I think the thing that's really interesting about that scenario is that breach actually occurred about 6 months before the like kind of breach actually happened, like the data that was stolen. Because what happened was someone got access to credentials early on, And then they were able to kind of exploit certain systems within that workflow, and then over time build up these kind of different access points to different things. We've seen it a lot, whether it's within the news or even not necessarily in the news, where people are getting access to things they shouldn't. And like, we really kind of believe that zero trust is predicated on the idea of authenticating and authorizing everything based on identity. The identity of the person, the identity of the machine, and that every action that is taken, requested, anything that's trying to get access to something else, everything has to be verified and everything has to be authorized. And if you can set up that kind of system where there's checks and balances throughout all of it, because if you look at all the breaches that have occurred over the last, let's say 10 years, I would say 80% of them have something to do with either lost credentials, leaked credentials, or stolen credentials. And so I think, Rick, you kind of made a point earlier about the paranoia, and I think the way that we look at it is, if you're in a public world where you're using public clouds, networks that aren't yours, you're on these different kind of platforms, you have to kind of architect your security posture like someone's already on the network. I don't think that's a paranoia thing. I think the thing is, you have such an attack surface that it's really hard to say, I'm going to secure the entire attack surface, so I'm going to really secure the individual pieces.
I was just going to say, I was just really agreeing there. That's absolutely right. I mean, I use the term paranoia because it's funny, but it actually is. It really is. There is a need for paranoia in the world of cybersecurity. Back to you.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree there as well. And I like that, like the fact that the mindset, right, a different way of thinking about zero trust and all the stuff we have talked about, why the attack surface has grown. I think Chris talked about, you have to assume there is an attacker in the midst, right? Gone are those days where you had this sort of hardened perimeter, everything inside was good and anybody could access anything. Now you have to just operate and have that sort of a mindset that, hey, look, there is an unwelcome guest within our networks, within our environment. And so what are the right controls and visibility and all the things, design reviews, as Jordan talked about, all the things that we need to enable to, sort of get to a place where we can verify every access. Now, at VMware, what we have been focusing on is, just talking to a lot of customers, what we have realized is, as the environment has become very complex, the customers are grappling with operational complexity as well. There's plenty of innovation in general in the security industry. There's lots of tools and platforms and technologies, but trying to operationalize all these things in itself is a massive challenge, in addition to bringing people along. And so at VMware, what we are focusing on are just some key areas where we have an intrinsic advantage with our platforms to help customers simplify and accelerate their journey to zero trust, as we talked about this being a journey. And so as an example, more than 85 million workloads are running on VMware platforms, hypervisor, right? Application developers are using our modern apps platform for the private cloud across multiple clouds. We have tens of millions of enterprise users leveraging a UEM or endpoint sort of security and device management capabilities. So we are building capabilities we have and continuing to enhance these at, whether it is federating user identity, whether it is device security and control and manageability, whether it is network security, especially on the east-west side, right? I think we talked about that attacker moving in and having a longer dwell time, the ability to detect and stop all that lateral movement and ensure that they can't, even if they get in, they can't stay in, and that way you minimize or avoid damage. And the last bit is securing the workload. So we have built capabilities that really sort of simplify. As an example, within the VMware hypervisor, right, which is where a lot of these 85 million workloads are running, we have built in east-west, like the capabilities where advanced network security, not only just stateful firewalling, but the ability to inspect all that traffic moving laterally on the east-west from even VM to VM. We can make that happen at truly cloud scale without having to make any network changes or do any crazy network tapping, right? No operational complexity. Policy automation, the ability to leverage tools like endpoint security, even for your workloads, in addition to the users, leveraging our Carbon Black solution. So that's the approach we are taking, which is we are not trying to be everything to everyone. No one vendor or solution is going to be able to, solve the problem and give all that thing that customers need, but we are delivering advanced security capabilities across these platforms to really help customers operationalize them and simplify their security architectures.
Thank you. Ian, over to you, sir.
I was just going to say the transition into zero trust is in fact a big step. Gigamon has been involved in a whole bunch of pilots and several large organizations that are moving in this direction. Now, I love the fact that we're talking about practical, achievable outcomes here, because when you look at zero trust, initially a lot of people, when John Kindervar came out with the original proposal, when NIST SP 800-207 came out, which was the NIST standard for zero trust, they were really, there was a little bit of comments, oh yeah, this thing will run great on PowerPoint, but how do we do it in the real world? The real world is that it's a difficult transition. And one of the things that you need is the ability to get in there and to troubleshoot and to diagnose and to verify the function of the controls that, for example, Vivek was just talking about. This is absolutely essential. So a major part of this is not just looking at the controls, but also the troubleshooting and the maintenance and the performance tuning. That is so essential for a real deployed zero trust network.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I like the fact that Jordan said he thinks it's too extreme and we should really call it minimal trust. I do take your point, Jordan. I understand what you mean. I think I suspect that the reason that it came out in the first place as a kind of this is zero trust was just basically to mark the contrast from what had gone before. But yeah, I do see what you mean. Of course, it's the least amount of trust is absolutely necessary for anybody to be able to get through the day and do their job at the company. And I've sometimes said that one way I've described zero trust, and I just wanted to say that one way I've used, which may be of help to the journalists, is if you were to invite a friend round to your house for dinner. Now they knock on the door. You open the door. You recognise them. You usher them into the living room. You sit them down, have a little chat. You might offer them a nice cocktail before we go to dinner. And then you, at a certain point, after 15, 20 minutes, you say, guys, I'm going to have to leave you for a minute. I've just got to pop to the kitchen to make sure that I haven't burnt the roast that I'm getting together for you guys. While you've left them in the room, in the living room, sipping their cocktail, they have complete run of your house. They could be going, I mean, you trust them because they're your friends, but they could be going through the drawers or the cupboards. They might find that Picasso that you have in the bedroom, behind which is the wall safe where you keep all the jewels. You are giving them complete run of your infrastructure. Now you contrast that with zero trust. You still open the door to them when as they arrive. You still usher them in and give them the cocktail in the living room. But when you pop out to go back to the kitchen and see that you haven't burnt anything, they're locked in the front room. All of the drawers and cupboards in the front room are padlocked, and they're on CCTV, so that while you're doing the cooking, you're either watching them with one eye on the CCTV, or at least you are recording their movements, so that if they do end up managing to purloin anything of your belongings, you know who got it, and you can go around and pick them up or get the police to go and check on them. Now, as I say, I'm not recommending this approach for your social lives, but you do get the difference between a zero trust attitude vis-a-vis the kind of the trust but verify that went before it. These are some manifestations of zero trust, but in the actual technology. This is not zero trust, the big concept, but where I see manifestations of zero trust in actual technology. My first one is in the PAM space, privileged access management, which I'm sure many of the audience are familiar with. I've been hearing PAM vendors talking about imposing a least privilege notion or concept on the users that they are managing. Obviously, PAM only deals with the most privileged groups or the people that have the most access rights within an organization. And on them, even those guys, you want to shrink to the maximum their privileges. You trim them right down to the absolute minimum, which is kind of what Jordan was talking about before, about minimal privilege, i.e. minimal trust required. That's in the PAM space. On the remote access side, we've all been dealing with remote access for the last 2 years. So we're all working from home. And as such, we've all been using VPNs. However, there are these new technologies that are emerging. I personally, and Omdia, as a result of me, calls them zero trust access. You will find that Gartner calls them zero trust network access, ZTNA. I deliberately leave out the N because I actually think that the modern era remote access is no longer about accessing a specific network. It's actually about accessing an application, regardless of what networks I have to traverse to get there. But zero trust access is the kind of replacement technology for VPN that we're seeing all over the place, not least in the kind of SASE explosion, which doubtless we'll have a conversation on another time. And then finally, in the cloud workload space, cloud workload security, that is, there's the whole notion of microsegmentation, which effectively means, again, closing down each workload and only enabling access for those other assets that really need to get to it, whether they be human beings getting to that asset or indeed other systems getting to it, non-human systems. So Vivek, could you tell us, does your company play in all or any of these spaces?
Yeah, thank you, Rick. So yes, I mean, we play in all of these areas in different levels of engagement and capabilities. As I had mentioned earlier, VMware has got a really broad footprint and is being leveraged and trusted by organizations globally. So what we have, as I think it was Galeal was talking about, like bolted on security, right? Where we are focusing is that creating intrinsic security capabilities within this platform. So let's start with on the workload side, right? Rick, that story you were talking about, the friends coming at the door, right? And that whole trust factor reminded me of a story where what's really happening in today's world is, imagine if somebody breaks into your house, right? And they break into your house, and not only they break, but let's say they end up staying for weeks or months in your house, going from room to room, listening in on those bedtime stories with the kids, sitting at the dinner table. It's untenable. We can't think that, like we can't imagine somebody doing that in our homes, but yet that is what is happening within our networks, within our trusted environment today. And that's why all this, sort of need for zero trust. So what we are focusing on with our on the workload side of things, as I talked about, we have built in capabilities, for example, leveraging our Carbon Black endpoint solution that is now integrated into the hypervisor for customers to leverage it and have an agentless experience where you can ubiquitously deploy best of breed EDR technology for the server workloads. Right now, in addition to that, you talk about east-west security, because we have talked about why the perimeter has pretty much obliterated in this distributed world, and east-west has become the new battleground. So the ability for us now, VMware pioneered really and sort of launched the concept of micro-segmentation about 8-9 years ago, and it was bleeding edge back then, right? When we launched this whole SDN, and micro-segmentation was a primary use case that allowed customers in software to segment out their networks down to the granular level of each of these applications have their own boundaries, so you can minimize any attacks moving laterally in your environment. Well, guess what though? If you look at any major high-profile attack, or most of these attacks that end up causing a damage, attackers are using stolen credentials or exploiting vulnerabilities and moving through legitimate ports and protocols. So even if you have a very well segmented network, attackers are moving through these allowed ports and protocols and causing damage, whether it's ransomware or exfiltrating data. And so the ability to actually inspect that traffic that is going through these allowed ports and protocols becomes very important, right? Where you can do both signature and behavior-based analysis. And I think it was referred to, I think, Rick, you talked about anomalies, detecting anomalies. So We have built those capabilities within our distributed security architecture within the hypervisor with our NSX firewall technology, which is fully distributed within the hypervisor. Now, on the user side, what we have done is taken our best of breed SD-WAN technology, software defined wide area network, which is how organizations that have very distributed either branches or users are using SD-WAN to connect them back into where the apps are residing, no matter whatever cloud environment. And so we have built advanced security capabilities within this SD-WAN points of presence globally, right? We have 150 plus points of presence, and we have effectively created security services where we can federate identity, authenticate and authorize users, have that access control, and apply the right security as the users are trying to access apps, no matter which cloud the apps are residing in, right? So this is our, what we call as VMware SASE, Secure Access Service Edge technology that allows customers to leverage it to not only provide the most optimal end user experience for users to access these apps, but ensure that it is, all the zero trust principles are applied to it. So instead of hairpinning traffic in that old VPN world where you have to hairpin inside into your DMZ, and then from there you sort of pivot out to the apps, we have this distributed DMZ approach with the VMware SASE. And that's how we're effectively helping customers get securing the user access in addition to securing the workload access we talked about earlier.
I think just to kind of offer a different perspective from kind of our lens. So, a lot of our companies or our customers are extremely distributed, multiple clouds, hybrid environments, and we kind of look at it as two types of access. And this is really like the human side and the machine side. And when you talk about, Rick, you mentioned the micro segmentation, and it's really interesting because one of the ways that we're kind of seeing the world change is this idea of kind of stepping outside of the realm of the VPNs, the SD-WANs, like all those, and like going more onto the service level. So doing service to service networking, so that the idea is like, so we have a product called Console, both a open source and enterprise version, but what it allows you to do is allows for service to service networking. So in like a service mesh type of world, while also not just like kind of securing the access between the two services. So really what it allows for you to do is you can say like database A can talk to application A, and that's it. And any other request that comes in, it's blocked. And then on top of it, just to ensure if there is someone on the network, like we talked about earlier, you're also encrypting that traffic between, so that anything that's happening doesn't get sniffed, doesn't get, people can't take down the packages and all that. On the human side, this is where it becomes really interesting, because a lot of, to your point, Rick, you mentioned, people are having different remote cultures, remote access, different systems, critical systems, clouds, different applications, all this. We kind of view this really in the kind of a similar way, where we think that, in order for someone to really kind of have full productivity, it's the idea of giving them like what are called like just-in-time credentials, so that they can access any system or host. Once they get that credential, we have a product called Vault, and it's something that we've kind of built our entire security kind of posture on, which is secrets management, right? The idea is that like we leverage that with another kind of secure remote access kind of platform called Boundary. It will then bring in credentials to the person automatically. So essentially think of it like, Rick, to kind of use your example earlier, I'll kind of just kind of talk quickly about this. Think of it as like a hotel, right? You go into the hotel, you give them your license or your passport, you get a key card to a room. That key card works only once. Once you use that key card, it's done. Even if someone finds that key card, no one can use it again. Hey, if you need another one, just go down to the front desk, get a new key card. And you can do that every single time. And what this does is it ensures that even if someone is like, let's say they get your credentials out of memory, they get your credentials because they were sitting in somewhere, you actually maybe left your laptop at the coffee shop, whatever it might be. The fact is you constantly have to verify who you are and that you can do what you're trying to do. And that is, whether you're a person trying to do that, whether you're an application or a service trying to do that, we kind of view that world that like everything, every single time needs to authenticate and authorize every single time.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. Ian, would you like to mention? I mean, I went through just 3 types there of implementations of zero trust. You guys play in any of those?
Yeah, we do. I mean, we've done a ton of work with micro-segmentation, not only in the cloud environment, not only in the private cloud environment, but in the physical environment. I'm not sure that I'd say it goes back 10 years. I'd actually say we've been doing micro-segmentation at various levels for a lot longer than that. And a lot of organizations have done micro-segmentation on physical networks. But the area I actually wanted to talk about is the idea of looking at the messy and complex environments. So when we are doing zero trust, we need to look at our whole network. A lot of people view zero trust only through the lens of managed devices and the things that they're familiar with, the managed devices that they actually have day-to-day experience with and can put EDR agents on, so forth. Real networks don't look like that. Real networks are messy and unpleasant. I'm sure many people heard the extremely funny story of the casino in Las Vegas that got hacked. And how did it get hacked? It got hacked through an Internet of Things connected temperature thermometer in an aquarium in the foyer. The attacker got through and into that and then into the casino's network. Yes, it's funny, but that happens all the time. How do we do zero trust when we have devices on our networks, on our zero trust networks, that we can't install agents on that might not provide us logging, like the smoke alarm that I'm actually looking at on my ceiling at the moment. It's an IoT connected device. It's not going to run an agent and I can't get logging out of it. How do we actually do that? How do we assess its trustability? And the answer is you do it by looking at the network behavior of that device. You do device-based authentication. User and entity behavioral analytics using the network traffic. And that's the area of expertise we're looking at. If you see, when we're talking about zero trust, I'm going to actually extend the conversation very slightly. We've talked about trusting systems and users. I also think we need to start to look at whether we trust the security mechanisms we use. And for example, why do we trust security mechanism A? Well, really, we shouldn't. If we're not trusting it, we should always have a rational reason to say that's there. And I really like how NIST SP800 actually maps it to say, for everything, you should have an ability to assess trust. It's one of the tenets. So we should always be looking at the mechanisms we use, the controls we use, and deciding whether we should trust them as well. So if we do EDR, we should trust it by network analytics, by looking at the network behavior of an entity. If we do NDR, we should trust it with EDR. That sort of interlocking trust relationship is really a proper zero trust implementation, not trusting anything, but verifying whether we should trust and whether we can trust.
Interesting. Thank you. I'd like to move on, if I may. I'm sorry if I don't want to cut anybody out here, but I want to get on to the third point, the third topic, if I may. We kind of half got here already in terms of what are the gaps, in other words, what needs to be done to achieve widespread zero trust adoption. And I'm going to come back to you, Ian, to lead on this one, if you would.
Absolutely. I some time ago wrote a blog post, and it was written in jest. And that blog post was to take the OSI model, 7 layers, and to extend it to 8, 9, and 10, 8 being the user, 9 being the organization, and 10 being the legal and compliance requirement. I was being totally tongue-in-cheek at the moment, and it sort of went everywhere. It's in Wikipedia, it's all over the place. But I actually think we have particularly a layer 8 and a layer 9 issue. And I'm going to introduce another concept that I really want to talk about. It's not a technology concept, it's a human concept. And that is the concept of a cognitive bias. When we are, as security architects, and I've been a security architect for 20 years, we tend to overtrust the familiar, and we tend to undertrust the unfamiliar. Things that where we feel we know them, we often assign them too much trust. We're meant to be doing zero trust. We should, in presentations I do, I have a picture of an old firewall that has a trusted and an untrusted port, a LAN and a WAN port, you know, and everything attached to one is trusted and everything attached to, and that's absurd. That's the whole base. That sort of is what zero trust is meant to be moving away from, that sort of gross approximation of trust. But in standards, in implementation guidelines, I do a lot of work with US government zero trust implementation guidelines. I see the same thing. We as security professionals need to stop doing that. We need to get out of our comfort zones. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have is that we still aren't properly doing zero trust. We're still over trusting things we shouldn't be, rather than asking how we can rationally do that and verify the minimal trust, as was said before.
No, I was going to say, I wanted to bring that back to Jordan, in fact, about what do you see for the gaps, Jordan? Where do you see the gaps that can enable minimal trust, if not zero trust?
Yeah, so I mean, I think everybody's been making really salient points about how difficult a problem this is to solve and address. And I mean, if we look back in time, you know, this is a problem that's been around for I'm going to make us all feel old here, but probably 25, 30 years, you know, all the way back to Stuxnet, perhaps even earlier, right? Like that's the first public instance that we see, but people have been working on this for even longer. So I don't think this is a problem that you can solve. It's a problem that you can mitigate. It's a problem that you can strategize around, but it's not something where, you know, you're going to have a silver bullet solution for it. And it's something that plays into a wider security strategy that supports you know, this zero trust methodology and, you know, gives you a chance against these attackers that are coming in through your microwave or through, you know, maybe even a microchip in the back of your mainframe, right? So the technology I'd like to highlight as something that I think really, you know, supporting this methodology and sort of supporting this subject of visibility and this subject of, you know, kind of having your corners checked, if you will, is EDR. I really think that, you know, instead of trying to solve the problem at the point of entry, and instead of trying to, you know, get it in that prevent step, I think we also need to look further down the kill chain in your, you know, detection and response steps. You know, if we truly can't mitigate the problem of a smoke detector with no logging enabled and no, you know, endpoint agents or anything, well, let's put endpoint agents on, you know, everything that smoke detector is going to try to attack. You know, let's start looking at the network traffic that the smoke detector is creating. Let's, you know, build sort of not a wall, but sort of a network of sensors, so that if anything out of the ordinary happens, you know, we have cause and information with which we can, you know, investigate it and respond to it. I think that's a really key sort of supporting factor to a zero trust strategy that I don't want to say is largely ignored, but I think it's easy to kind of, you know, tunnel vision on, all right, let's implement zero trust in every, you know, device that we implement, but we'll talk about other products and other pieces of the strategy later. I really think it's key that these things grow together and they grow symbiotically, where, you know, one feeds into the other and one fills into the gaps that the other creates, if that makes sense.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, man, definitely. Galeal, I wanted to come to you because you've talked interestingly before we actually got jumped onto this call. We were talking a bit about, you come up with the idea that ISVs, that in other words, independent software vendors, companies that sell enterprise software to end user companies, the ISVs themselves should be thinking about embedding zero trust into their applications in order to make the life easier for their enterprise customers. Now, how do they go about embedding zero trust into their applications out the gate?
Yeah, Rick, if we take a quick step back, the objective of any company, any of our customers, it's not really zero trust or even security, right? It's delivering an awesome experience to their customers. It's innovating. It's business velocity, right? Those are the actual business goals, Rick. And what's interesting, and where it intersects with this conversation, and other folks have alluded to this as well, modern companies with modern architectures are multi-cloud. The compute is all over the place. It will increasingly be on the edges as well. We are actually moving to a distributed compute world. Now, in that world, if you're an at-scale SaaS provider, if you're an at-scale ISV, if you are Atlassian, throw them in there for Ian. If you are Salesforce, if you are ServiceNow, if you are Splunk, to deliver to your customers when your compute is all over the place, multiple clouds, edges, et cetera, today is extraordinarily difficult. Your customers have to deal with things like VPN, SD-WAN, MPLS, private link, things that are bolted on to the absolute wrong architecture, right? That SD-WAN architecture is going away, right? There's no real reason anymore to connect to centralized print servers, file servers to do branch-to-branch traffic. It's the wrong architecture for today. So if you're that at-scale ISV, if you're that at-scale SaaS provider, you want to say, Rick, hey, Rick, you want to plug in with a secure connection over the internet from anywhere, your device, your person, it doesn't matter. And Chris, you want to do it, and Jordan, you want to do it, and Vivek, you want to do it, and you all have different types of infrastructure across different clouds, et cetera, just plug into my cloud. Plug into the ServiceNow cloud. Plug into the Atlassian super cloud. So what these folks can do is take control of the network. The compute's all over the place. And yeah, Rick, what they're doing is making that network secure by design. They're using, as you mentioned, zero trust principles, so that when I do want to connect to Salesforce, ServiceNow, et cetera, I'm identified, I'm authenticated, I'm authorized, and it's all built into the software, right? That's the magic that we're moving into. It's taking what used to be in the networking domain and the security domain, two bolted on domains, and actually moving it into the application code.
That's interesting. Thank you. I'd like to bounce that one off Vivek, because obviously you guys have got an awful lot of the networking background there and the security. So did that chime with you, Vivek, or do you see?
It does. I think everything, like right from Jordan to what Ian said and Galeal talked about, I think all of that is absolutely spot on. I 100% agree. There are just too many blind spots, right, that exist today. And I 100% agree, like Ian was talking about, and I think Jordan mentioned as well, EDR, NDR, all these things become increasingly important. And I think bringing that context in, and that's what we are also focusing on, right? We talked about, we have EDR, we have NDR, right? But in a way that is very unique, right? Delivers it in a tabless architecture. No need to do like massive data lakes and copying over packets. You make the hypervisor your sensor, which is ubiquitous. And you basically provide the right context, right from the users to the workloads to the network out to your security operations center. So as Jordan said, you really need to effectively get to that, detection and response. And we like to really start talking about, I know there's this whole buzzword about XDR in the industry. And for us, right, it begins with, let's leverage that context. Let's take the context from EDR and NDR, as Ian talked about, and provide that to the SOC, right? But let's, as an industry, make it happen as an open ecosystem, right? So we don't want to lock customers in and only my SOAR platform is where it'll take signals from my security solutions. We feed in the context, help eliminate those blind spots, provide all the context visibility, and enable the security teams to effectively do that DNR, which is detection and response, identify and do threat hunting, and make sure that these attackers, won't be able to stay inside our networks. So that's my
Excellent. Thank you. Chris, any thoughts from you on that one? Sorry, was that him? Were you wanting to chime in?
I was just going to say one little thing, and it's going to be a little bit controversial. If you are going to have controls that are checking each other, they shouldn't be a consolidated solution. They should be different solutions. So I talked before about EDR and NDR, or XDR, as you said, which is often logging plus EDR. That's not the right approach for zero trust. You should have one solution checking the other, one solution verifying the functionality of the other. That's how zero trust is meant to work.
Yeah, Ian, I completely agree. And it's something that, like, I know, like, we're specifically talking about our companies, but like our philosophy has always been that, like, we we literally don't trust ourselves type of a thing. So when we build our software, that like if someone gets access even to a part of the software they're not supposed to, that it can't just traverse into something else. And I think one of the pieces that we kind of really talk to when we're talking to some of the largest companies in the world is that like there's a concern really around trying to like remove the human error element of it. So automating a lot of this stuff so that like whether something's getting access to something, data is being encrypted across these different things, it's being encrypted at rest. A lot of it is like, how do we remove the fact that someone maybe typed something wrong, they did something wrong that they shouldn't have, so that like everything is really kind of on this kind of checks and balances system. We kind of view, to bring back to your earlier question, Rick, like we kind of view the three kind of areas really as like identity, access, and data, right? So like a lot of these companies, or almost every company in the world, has a trusted or multiple trusted identity platforms that they use: Active Directory, LDAP, you name it, Okta, any of these kind of bigger companies. And so like leveraging those trusted identities that have those kind of built-in response to Ian's point, like having these kind of different checks and balances so that you don't have that kind of like a fatal funnel, right? Like that single point of failure that can bring down everything, because there really isn't that. And then really just kind of making sure that like, policies are global, but they're granular, having that kind of like ability to go at the different levels. And, the one piece I think gets left out in a lot of the zero trust conversations is the actual data itself. A lot of it talks about like who gets what and access to what, how does these things get access to everything else. But even in the world where all of your fail safes fail, the idea that like if you're encrypting your data in transit and at rest, at least if someone has gotten access to those things, that it's still fundamentally protected. So that like you're kind of layering these kind of different things on top of each other.
Got it. Yeah, no, interesting. So then it basically, unlike in the world of Tolkien, we can safely say that when it comes to implementing zero trust, you should not be looking for one ring to rule them all. Okay, I'm going to ask each of you, please, now to be concise and to the point. And if I give you a minute each, could you give me your conclusions of what you've heard, and basically what is your definition of zero trust coming out of this conversation? Jordan, I'm going to start with you, sir.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best. I think zero trust is definitely, like I said, it's about minimum trust. It's about building a web or a network of devices and policies that all, sort of secure each other rather than securing themselves. And it's really about that visibility and documentation piece where, you have something that you can look at, you have something that you can refer to in the event of an incident or in the event of, needing to kind of turn back the pages and look at, what was done in the past. That's how I'd summarize.
Thank you. Ian, going to go to you, sir.
I would put it this way. The way I look at zero trust is rational trust. I need to be able to answer the question of why I trust something. And if I can't do that, I'm not doing zero trust. And the way I answer that question is by monitoring everything. And in a way that an attacker cannot compromise that monitoring. So the ability to assess the trustability of something and make rational trust decisions is the essence of zero trust. We need to start doing that. And to me, zero trust is the only way forward. I don't see a lot of other security approaches that are viable. Zero trust is an incredibly exciting thing that we're going to be moving towards over the next 10 years.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Yeah, so I think as companies are moving from this kind of like traditional kind of data center world into the cloud, they have a lot of problems to solve and a lot of different ways to kind of attack this. And I think ultimately we view it as, securing everything by identity. And so at the end of the day, if you, the posture should be to trust nothing and to authenticate and authorize everything.
Great stuff. Thank you. Galeal, over to you, sir.
It's the application. not the network. That's really what we're talking about, Rick, here. No network is secure. Obviously, no network should be trusted. That's not the job of a network. The job of a network is to deliver packets. When we make it about the application and we identify, authenticate, and authorize based on a number of factors that have nothing to do with the network, then we can properly enable application access, not just from a security perspective, but also from a business velocity, agility, extensibility perspective.
Perfect. Thank you, Vivek. Last but by no means least, over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I take a more broader perspective on zero trust. It's not just identity. It's not just the application side of things. There are two primary areas. One is this user side, where you have the right identity federation, access controls to applications in any cloud, right? What we call as multi-cloud, securing that. The other aspect of that is the workload access, right? And that's where all that sort of, right from workload to all the east-west network traffic, everything needs to be secured. You just can't say it will be any one thing. And so I think it spans the capability. Zero trust requires you to span the user and the workload side, covering endpoints, the use of identities, to workloads and networks.
Okay, so I was going to say thank you to everybody for some interesting points. I've enjoyed the conversation. I thought there was some very interesting takeaways from that. I thought it was really useful. Thanks all.